All right, it's 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A session. I'm Dave McCormick from Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Dion McCormick, no relation, who comes to us every Wednesday, showing you demonstrations of Alpha Anywhere, and is here to answer your questions. Before we get started, a couple things I'd like you to know. One is that this session will be recorded, and recordings of this and our other webinars can be found at videos.alphasoftware.com. Second thing is that these sessions really are made possible by your questions. So at any point, including right now, if you have any Alpha Anywhere questions, I encourage you to go to the questions box of the GoToWebinar interface and type in your questions. So let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good to hear from you, Dave.
Great. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter. And you should see a dialog box appear. And I can see your screen.
Okay. Hopefully I'm not scaring everybody there. I was like, whoa. Kind of harsh way to start the webinar there.
I don't know about that, man.
Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. First and foremost, and I'd like to reiterate what Dave said, is that this is about you, your concerns, your needs, your desires, and the way we find that out is through your questions. So go to your GoToWebinar control panel and go to the questions section, enter in there. Dave will be monitoring those throughout the webinar and making sure that we cover them either in the webinar. If we can't, we'll line them up for a future one or get back to you personally. What I'd like to do first, I've got a little demonstration. We had a really good question last week. It's going to be a two-part demonstration. I'll do the first part this week, next part next week regarding dynamic panels, talk a little bit more about those. But before that, I want to remind everybody, coming up very shortly, September 16th through the 18th, so we're essentially a month away, is the Alpha DevCon 2015 conference up in Burlington. Really phenomenal event. I highly recommend you take the time to check it out. You can go to the Alpha Software website, go to the information page on this, and that will explain what's going on. And what's incredible is that there's pre-conference training. I'm not sure, Dave, if we have any other available spots, but we really are getting a great response.
Pre-conference training is sold out at this point, but the rest of the conference is. And we have a lot of great speakers. We have Michael Facemeyer from Forrester, who'll be giving us an overview just to sort of kick off the conference. We have another keynote speaker the following day from Bentley's User Experience Center, which is basically a university laboratory that's set up to measure how people interact with software. And I'm sure her findings are going to be very interesting. Also, we'll have basically almost everybody from the development team, Selwyn Rabins, Kurt Rayner, Lenny Forziati, Terry Smith, Bob Moore, and of course Dion are all scheduled to speak at this conference. I think it's going to be really great. So we've just started to post a little bit more details about what's the actual technical content, and you can find that on our blog at alphasoftware.com/blog.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that the technical term for all those individuals is a rogues gallery is what we will have at this event. And but if you have any burning questions, man, these people know how to do things. So it's a phenomenal event, lots of great connections, and I highly recommend you take the time to check on that. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to go through a quick presentation or a little demonstration. It's going to be a little bit more on the technical side, so you're going to have to bear with me, but it's, you'll get it. And then next week I'm going to follow up with a secondary one. The question we had that came in last week was a question regarding dynamic panels. So let me go ahead and go into the Alpha development environment. So I'm in the Alpha development environment, and let me just go show you how I can create a couple quick static panels. Let's start with static panels. So I'm going to click New. I'm in the, for the people who are new, this is the Alpha development environment. I'm at the Web Components level, and I'm going to click New. I'm going to select Web Component, click Next. And then I want to create a UX, because UX is essentially our form control. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Okay, now remember, we have a whole bunch of example ones that are in here, which are great way to get kick-started by clicking, especially these mobile ones, really helpful there. But for now, I'm going to start with a blank UX component. Okay, so now I have my UX builder, and I have right here, and again, for people who are new to this, if you click here to watch videos right here, it's going to start guiding you into how the UX Builder works. So built into the tool is a lot of really good resources for you to ramp up your skill sets. But I highly recommend watching those videos. It kind of gives you a good framework along with these webinars, and from there you can dig into the details. So I'm going to click on Controls, and I'm going to go down into the Panels section on the left-hand side. Okay, so the left-hand side is where we have all our different controls, our different events, server-side event and code, and the central portion will be the layout of our form, and on the right you'll see properties pop up as we start to do it. So first and foremost, I'll see I have panel layout and panel navigator. Think of these as sort of hidden traffic cop containers. They control the structure of the panel cards that are in the panel layout or panel navigator. But also I like to show people when they're getting started, we have this area here called Quick Panels. And if you click on there, there's a whole bunch of predefined layouts. You can either start moving things in here or predefined layouts, and there's split views, etc. Really cool. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a split view basic with icons. So remember, when you click on Panel, Quick Panels, it opens up where you can quickly create the panel or select a predefined panel. And when you click OK, the system will automatically build a quick example of a panel layouts. This way you don't have to start from scratch. Really nice too is that if you notice there's one thing up here called Things of Note. If you click on there, double click on it, this is going to describe in detail how this layout is built and what it's supposed to do. So it gives you that kind of background information on what's going on from that standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and do a working preview. Okay. And now, actually, let me do a live preview, which will show it a little bigger. But now watch this. You'll have panel header. If I click here, it's just giving me a message that each one of these actions is being clicked on. But you'll notice we have our panel layout, we have our header up here, we have a panel layout to the left, and then an area where our content is in the middle, and you can learn more about that. So real important was when you're starting out, make sure you use quick panels. Experiment with them. It'll really help you out a lot. But I'm going to go ahead and go back in, and I'm going to create a very simple example because what I want to talk about is the concept of static panels versus dynamic panels. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go into my controls. I'm going to go back down to my panels. So I'm back in there. I'm going to go ahead and put in a panel navigator. And you'll notice I have a panel navigator. You'll notice the system is telling me, uh-oh, I've got something going on here. And it automatically makes sure that my layout is going to be correct. But if I click on this, it says, hey, I need to have some kind of panel inside panel navigator for it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a panel card. Insert a panel card. So you now notice I have a panel navigator with a single panel card in there. And you'll notice that the navigator, that error message has gone away because I have a valid structure. Now this doesn't do anything really exciting, but we can look at that in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple other panel cards. So now we have 3 panel cards in our system here. And I'm going to go to each of these panel cards and I'm going to add a piece of static text, just so we have something each card 1. Okay, and then I'm going to go to panel card number 2, put in some static text there, panel card 2, and then last but not least, panel card number 3. Go in here and go panel card 3. Okay, so let me go ahead and save this, panel static underscore UX. Now notice I'm going to come back to this in a few moments. Notice how I name this. Since I'm doing a panel demonstration, I started out with the word panel, and then this is a static example. And then the last thing I did was put it that this is a UX, and I'll explain about that a little bit more, but I want to kind of highlight on that. So I'm going to save this into my system with panel underscore static underscore UX. Now I'm going to give you a live preview. So you'll notice that immediately we're seeing panel card number 1. And then if I click and drag like a swipe, you'll notice that it brings in panel card number 2. And then when I swipe again, it brings in panel card number 3. So we have a panel navigator that's a traffic cop that basically shows one of these panel cards at one time. We have panel card 1, 2, and 3. When I launch it, it's immediately going to show me panel card number 1. And then when I do the drag, it automatically drags in panel card 2. And the power is it's handling all of that for me. So all I have to worry about more is the content of what's going on from there. Now I like to usually do one other thing is in this panel navigator, I'm going to right click on that and add a panel header. So you'll notice now that I've added a panel header, and you'll notice that it's a different color. That's just a visual highlight to kind of tell you that this is different from your panel cards. And in there I'm going to put static text, and I'm going to put in here static panel card example. Okay, so now let's take a look and see what it looks like. Basically the same thing, but you'll notice now I have this nice full-length panel card, and if I move these from side to side, it still works. And if I want to see what this looks like in a mobile device, I can click mobile, go into my live preview here, and now you can see exactly, notice how the panel header is kind of shortened because I have a smaller, but I'm swiping the gesture to move those panel cards in there back and forth. So that's a real quick introduction to what I like to call our static panel cards. Now, Alpha has a very powerful capability, and that capability is you can dynamically generate panel cards and content. Now, it's a little bit more complex, but for people who are looking to make more dynamic-driven systems, the neat thing is you don't have to lay out your whole system before putting it out there. It can be driven by the data of your system. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. This is my static example. I'm going to go to my Web Projects Control Panel. And actually, before I go from here, I just want to do a process check with Dave, make sure everything's coming through okay and sounds okay visually. Good, good, good. So what I wanted to show you here real quick is just a little quick trip that really helps you out. You'll notice that this is my demonstration Alpha Anywhere workspace. So I have a ton of stuff in here from all the different demonstrations and examples I do. So as your solution starts growing, you're going to find you're going to have a lot of different things that are involved with it. So you want to come up with a naming convention that you stick to. And so remember when I talked about making the first part of this panel? Now watch what happens when I click and type into this filter here. I'm going to type panel. You'll notice that then it has started to filter and hide things that don't have the word panel in it. So you'll notice I have my panel static, which I just created, and then I have some of my other panel cards that I've already created for my demonstration today. So really start thinking about how you're going to name your components, to name them consistently, and I usually use them by topic, kind of like so. In this case, it's all about panels. So I started always with panel. So when you do that search, you can quickly find the things you're wanting to work on. And we'll talk about that more in future examples. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I have an example here called Panel Dynamic Parent. It's going to open that up. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you how it works, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you how it was built. And again, this is a little bit more complex, so bear with me and we'll provide you all the code and everything else. But it looks pretty simple. You have a panel layout. In this case, it's a panel layout. You have a panel header and a embedded panel navigator. And I'll come through and break down each of these elements as I go through it. So I'm going to click Live Preview. Okay. So you'll notice up here I don't have any panels right in the middle. Oops, pressed the wrong thing. Wait, here. Always first time through there. Let me go ahead and do the live preview again. Excuse me. So you'll notice that I have my panel header, and down here I have a panel layout, but there's no panels there. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to click a number 1, and I'm going to click Add Panel. Aha! Notice what came down here. A new panel was created, and this is called a dynamic panel. So let me go ahead and click here, and I'm going to put in the numeric 2 and click Add Panel. Notice what happened. It created a new panel and set the focus. So now I can go back and look at panel number 1 and panel number 2. And I can do that for 3, 4, 5, 6, as many as I want. And you'll notice that it's actually dynamically generating and adding in new panels each time. Now, a couple things I would do to enhance this down the road is that as I created these panels, I'd probably add their names to the list. So then I would have essentially a dynamic menu showing the different panels that are available in the screen. But I want to keep this pretty simple for what we're doing here. So that's all this does is instead of me having to physically lay out the static panels, because certain situations I may not know how many panels I need. I could have a situation where I have like a back office person who is dynamically pulling up customer records, and they want to be able to have maybe 4 or 5, 6 at a time up on their screen. Well, there's no reason you need to do that. Now, if you use a tabbed UI, which you've probably seen before, tabbed UI does something similar where when you open up a new panel or a control, it actually opens up in a tab, and this is accomplishing somewhat the same thing. Now let's go through this, and I want to do 2 things real quick, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. First is I want to talk about the structure of how this works. And then secondly, I want to talk about the little JavaScript code that is used to perform this dynamic panel. So we have at the top level a panel layout. Now the difference between a panel layout is, think of a panel layout as sort of a fixed structure, meaning that a panel navigator, as you saw before, you only see one panel at a time. With a panel layout, you actually can structure it so you can see multiple panels at the time, so you're laying it out on the screen. So if you're like laying out a web page, you can use a panel layout to create a top section and then 2 sections that are side by side. And one of the most powerful capabilities of this is the ability to embed panel layouts within panel layouts, but also panel navigators within panel navigators. So I have my panel layout at the top. I've got a header here, which has my text and my button. And then also embedded in here, I have a panel navigator, but you'll notice that all I have in here is a header and no panels here. Because what I'm doing is when I click Add Panel, what it's doing is dynamically adding a panel into this panel navigator. So let me go ahead and show you what it looks like. Remember, we have a panel layout. At the top, we have a panel header there. And then we have a panel navigator with its own little header, where we'll put the dynamically created panels. So I'll go in live preview. You'll see up top here we have a header that has some text, a text field in there. And then this is this area right here is my panel navigator, which has a header, but you'll notice no panels are in there. And so now if I go ahead and say add a new panel, it dynamically creates that panel and puts it inside the navigator. So now the navigator can manage it, which means the navigator can handle the swipe gestures, what's being shown, what's not being shown, etc. So it's a very simple structure where I have a panel layout and an embedded panel navigator, and I basically I'm basically creating the panels in there. Now, here's the magic, and this is how this works. So on this interface on the top, I have a panel number where I give it a unique ID like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I have a panel or a button on there saying Add Panel. And when I click on that button, it fires this click event on the right-hand side. So I've selected my item in the middle, and on the right-hand side are my settings for that button, but also my behaviors, in this case, the click event. And you'll notice that what it's doing is it's running a little piece of JavaScript called Add Panel. Now I could write my JavaScript right in here, but what I like to do is put my JavaScript in a function and just call the function from the button. So therefore all my functions are going to be in one place. So where do we find that? So we've defined a button. We've told it to run this function called Add Panel. And where I find that is over here on the left-hand side in the JavaScript functions. So now you'll see you have a function here called Add Panel that will run. Now I'm going to walk you through this code. As you can see, for people who are new, don't freak out. It's JavaScript. You'll start to get, this is again a little bit more of an advanced topic. I'm going to come back next week and talk and show you another method to perform this, but I don't have time to do both. So I want to kind of show you this method for the more advanced users and then come back next week. So let me walk you through what's going on. Is that the first thing what we're doing right here is we're grabbing the value of that text box. So remember, we had a text box up here called panel num, where we type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, that can be dynamic generated for more advanced solutions. But what I'm doing first is all I'm doing is grabbing the value of that number and putting it in this ID. And then I run a little check saying, hey, make sure there's a number. If there's not a number, warn the user that there's a problem and stop the processing. So that's my first step right there.
Gian, can I interrupt for one second?
Yes.
Just a quick question about what you're doing right now. And the question is, in your example, does the text field and the labels for the panels, do they have to be integers? Can they be names instead of numbers?
Absolutely. You can use whatever one. We used an ID, a numeric ID, but you can use the different types of numeric ones there. So you can use either or. And you'll notice in a moment I'm dynamically creating the panel name and the panel title. So everything is dynamically set. So you can create it like, for instance, maybe you want the panel name and the title to be the name of the customer who you're going to display the information in that particular dynamic panel.
So it is actually a string, but you're just having it entered in as a number. Is that correct?
Yeah, okay. That's correct.
That's it. Thank you.
Great. So what I do first is I get that ID that I put into the user interface, make sure that I got something, because if I don't get something, then it's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you need to enter something there. Then using that ID information, and I'm basically creating the unique panel name and the unique panel title, so that that dynamically created panel is going to have its own panel name and panel title. Then what I'm going to do is, and this is the tricky part here, is that I'm going to run a little thing that dynamically, it's just a little piece of there that says new A5 panel card. So this is a built-in Alpha 5 little routine where you're going to create a new panel card, and therefore you feed it and you tell it what's in here. And this is what you would change to change what's inside of that panel card when it is created. And so this is where you would expand on this. So for us, all we're doing is we're putting a little piece of HTML text that says this is the new panel card for the panel name I just created. Then what I do is this. So this first step is I kind of get the ID, I create these unique names, and now I'm going to create the new panel card and set the content of that dynamically. So you can write code here to write it, to look up data, to add more information, to insert some HTML from another page or an outside page, to call a web service. All of that is available within this. Then what I do is I get a pointer to our panel navigator, because remember, when we create this panel card, we want to show that panel card in the panel navigator. So we essentially need a pointer to that panel navigator. And by the way, I'm going to copy and put this code in the next few minutes in the, we're going to send that, or I'm going to send it out as a text file to everybody here in a few minutes. So don't need to try and write it down or anything like that. And remember, this will be, video is being recorded, so it'll be available for you to kind of watch in the future there. So I've got my new panel card, I get a pointer to my panel there, and then I run another little piece of code that says add that new panel to the panel navigator and set that panel to be active with that panel navigator. And that's why when we created it, it kind of swiped over and you saw the new one there. And so this is all there is. There's probably about 20 lines of code. We get the ID, we set up the naming, we create the panel card, we get a pointer to our navigator, and then we go ahead and say, go ahead and add this panel into that navigator there. Now what's cool about this is that let's say you had a drop-down box or a list control. You could be updating that control with the information at the same time, so you could be building dynamically essentially a menu of what panel cards are available. So all of that is available within this tool right here. This basically creates the panel cards and sticks them in there and adds them to there. And so again, what happens if I go in here, this code, what it does is that I put in a number here. When I click Add Panel, the first thing it does is make sure I have a number in there. When I do, it creates the panel, finds the panel navigator right here, and adds that panel in there, and off to the races there, and I can add as many as I want. What's nice is now that they're added in there, they're on the client side, so they're incredibly fast. And this technique works both for web-based ones, but also for mobile interfaces also. So you're not limited to just doing this using a web browser. You could actually do it on a mobile device where you could be dynamically creating panels from there. So that, I'm going to hold off right here. I'm sure there's a few questions about that. next week also we're going to show you another methodology that you can kind of accomplish the same thing, and you'll find that one also is a powerful way for you to create dynamic interfaces where you don't have to set up. So in certain cases, you'll set up a specific panel card structure because you know there'll be 3 different panel cards that are needed with 3 different types of data. For solutions where you don't have that kind of knowledge in the forefront of building it, you can use this dynamic methodology where you can basically create your structure and dynamically create these panels, and then they exist inside the system, and you can look at them, move them, do everything you can do with panels you can right now using the same method. And again, for newer people, this is a bit more of an advanced topic, so don't worry if it got a little fuzzy right there. Pretty soon your skill sets will get up and you'll be using these techniques to build your solutions there. So let me do this real quick. I want to, while you review the questions right now, I'm going to take this JavaScript function right now and file save as, and we're calling that startup. Sorry, I should have already had this ready to go. We'll call it add panel. Okay, I'll come back over to here, and I'm going to choose that file in Dropbox here. That's good. And add panel. Okay. Oh, egads. Bear with me, everybody here. Add panel. Okay. There you go. It likes that one a little bit more. Oh. Why does it not like that? I'll send it out in a few moments. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and open up the Q&A. Any questions on that while I go ahead and change this right quick group.
Great. There. So we actually had 2 people ask the same question, which is, what if you accidentally or inadvertently use the same ID for a panel?
Oh, that will throw an error because it gets confused because each panel has to have a unique ID so that you are able to do that. So yeah, you got to be a little careful on that so that it does that, or that it's unique in there. And what you can do is there's functions where you can use like a unique ID function that are available.
So. Okay, so a question really along those lines also was, could you use Alpha Anywhere, or how would you use Alpha Anywhere to increment the ID to the next available number? So as opposed to...
Oh, okay. Well, there's a couple different ways to do that. Let me go ahead and upload that. Okay, so everybody, there's a Word doc. Hopefully you can open it up. If not, we'll go ahead and paste it there. Yep. Of that in there, so you don't have to rewrite that code. So let me go back into here. So the couple different ways you can handle that is that since you have a handle to this navigator, you can actually test and see if that ID exists with an existing panel. So you can get from this, you can get a list of existing panels and then say, walk through each of those panels. And since it's all client-side, it'll be incredibly fast there. The other opportunity you can use is that you can store the last used ID as a JavaScript variable, and what will happen is that variable will be available for each time you run this function, so that you can look at that variable and then increment it by 1, so you always know you don't have the last one. So you can use either a combination of a JavaScript variable that's kind of persists while the person is using the solution on the local device, or you can actually inspect the navigator and do there. And I think, and I'll have to see on this, let's see, JavaScript GUI ID. There might be a GUI ID function that you can create to create, your own like primitive GUI ID. So, for instance, I could create my own little function to create a unique ID, so I can ensure each one of those that are added are unique when I'm in there. So there's some little JavaScript tricks you can use to go, create a pseudo unique ID. And since that unique ID is just really for the time they're using the system at that point, you're not usually saving it into the database or anything like that. You're usually very safe on doing that methodology there.
Excellent. Another question came in saying, can you change the display type for a desktop? For example, on a mobile device, swipe makes sense to go from one to the other, but on a desktop, can you make it do something different?
Absolutely. Since we're dynamically creating the content of the panel card here, we could add in links, which fires off the action JavaScript to move from one control to the other. You essentially have full control over the content of that panel card. And again, this is a bit more of an advanced topic, so it takes a little bit more research. But basically what we're doing is we're saying the content of this panel card is just some HTML, and here is the HTML. Well, there's nothing to be said that that can also be graphic buttons and things like that. And you can also use, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but you can detect what kind of platform you're on using JavaScript, because Alpha kind of knows what platform it's running on. And you can use that information when you generate the panel card to say, create it of this style or this style, whichever one you want to do. And you can even change the look and feel and things like that from it from that standpoint.
Great. Here is, and I'd like to remind people to keep your questions coming in. We have, actually, this is one of our fuller things. I know you guys can't see how many people are on, but we have almost 50 people on the line.
And we really appreciate that, everybody.
And glad that you're here, but would love it if you have asked some more questions. Anyway.
Yeah, and again, I like to say this is an advanced topic, so for some of the new people, ask some questions and we can do some other pieces too.
Excellent. So here is a question. Someone who is developing a PhoneGap application with quite a few drop-down boxes, 264 drop-down boxes. Problem is that during the design phase, when he makes a change to the set of static choices for one of the controls, it takes a long time for Alpha Anywhere to regenerate that component just by making the change. And he says it could take up to 1.5 minutes just waiting for all the, it seems that it's recalculating all the other controls. Is there a way to stop it from recalculating it, or do you have another piece of advice?
Well, I don't know of a way to stop it recalculating because it's basically relaying it out. The concern I would have with that environment is just with 260 drop-down, it may be a bit sluggish when it's running on the local machine because that's just a ton of HTML. Just a massive amount of HTML that's being built because it's building the HTML to render every control and then all the content for each one of them. So there's kind of two words of advice. First and foremost, you have to check out the new tablet form, the new technology that's coming out at the developers conference, because this new methodology is that when I lay out a system here, when I put a control on here, it's going to render all the HTML for each of those controls. So for instance, if I have a drop-down, let's say I had 10 of these controls and each one of them was a drop-down box. In that case, it is going to create 10 drop-down box controls, so you can have 10 times the HTML. The new technology that's coming out, and I know this doesn't help you right at this moment, but be prepared because it's coming very soon. What you can do is you can have 10 controls, but then point to a dynamic drop-down box that will change for each one of those controls. And thus, you will essentially have 10 placeholders and one drop-down control, and that's all your HTML. And then when you go from item to item, the system will use JavaScript or Java to load up what are the choices for that particular item. So therefore, you're going to get a dramatically reduced amount of HTML, so your application is going to run faster, it's going to be simpler, and it's going to be much easier. The other part about that, which is really powerful, is that it's going to become much more maintainable because instead of managing 268 drop-down boxes, you'll put in 268 placeholders, but then you'll just create an algorithm to dynamically load what values it should be for each drop-down box. And again, it will increase the speed, the simplicity of your app, and you won't have that minute and a half render time because it will essentially render in a matter of seconds because you're only rendering 12 controls instead of 268 controls. controls. So check that out. Now, the other thing you may want to look at is what you could also do too is that, and this is something to explore, and I don't have an example here, is that in a, let's say I'm going to have a drop-down box on here, drop-down box, we'll just put that in there. Normally, when you have a drop-down box, and this is for people who are new, you go into the choices here, and then you either have a static list of drop-down items, A, B, C, D, or you use a dynamic, or you can use what's called a variable. Now, the cool thing about the variable capability is if you're using more of an online situation, you can dynamically generate this with XBasic. But if you're in a PhoneGap application, what you can basically do is this, is you can actually have all of your drop-down choices in a JavaScript file that is downloaded with the application. So instead of actually embedding the choices in every drop-down box, what you basically do is you dynamically load that drop-down box with a little Java, and therefore all of that that content is in an external file. And the benefit of that is then each of your drop-down boxes, you would still have a whole bunch of drop-down boxes, but instead of having to maintain each one to have its choices, you would basically have a JavaScript function that says, for this drop-down box, go in this file and look up these choices and show those. And then for this drop-down box. So you get your maintainability up. It's not as good as the new stuff, but it will allow you to dramatically reduce the amount of maintenance. And again, since that's just a JavaScript little routine, it's not having to build all of the HTML for every one of those HTML drop-down boxes. So you should see the saving of your application there. And since you're using PhoneGap, it's ideally suited because in PhoneGap, you can say, hey, include this JavaScript file that has all this JSON data. And that JSON data is what you're going to use to populate the drop-down box. So I hope that gives you some hints on the direction to go at. Again, the new technology will dramatically simplify what you're trying to do, and it's purposely meant that way to say, listen, we don't want to have this big, heavy, tons of controls. We rather have placeholders and have like 4 or 5 editor controls, and they dynamically behave. And it's kind of a new technique. It'll take a little different thinking about how it does it, but you're going to see dramatically smaller and faster solutions. If that's not, if you have a shorter time frame, then definitely look at possibly loading your drop-down boxes using JSON data using a JavaScript command. And you can send in information. We can find some more pointers on how to give you that information. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, and if you do want to send a question, send it to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com, and we can look into that. A couple of more questions here. One is, can you insert a list control dynamically?
Let's see, can you create a list control dynamically? I'm going to have to think about that.
Okay.
I know you can modify a list control dynamically, but I'd have to find out if you could do that through a code kind of basis kind of scenario. Again, off the top of my head, I'm not sure if you can do that or not at this point.
Another question is, can you give a flipboard effect to a panel?
Very good question. Let me do this. Let's go to my static panel here. I'm going to add a button to my header here, and I'm going to go ahead and call this flip. Okay, so I have, this is my static panel. So I have my navigator, I have my panel header that's going to be at the top at all time, then I have my different panel cards. So what I'd like to do is when the person clicks the button flip, what I'd like it to do is go to panel card 2, and let's look at some of the animation that's possible. So I'm going to go to button flip, and I'm going to go down here to the right to the JavaScript actions. This is where we add behaviors, and then I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to say panel actions. So I'm searching for panel actions, and then I'm going to say panel set active, and I'm going to select that panel card 2. Now you'll notice I have an animation capability, but it doesn't look like I have any controls over that. So I think what's going to happen here is it's just going to pop over and maybe slide in, slide out. So yeah, it didn't do that there. So the other alternative to panels is you can, let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and add a container in here. Containers tend to have a little bit more power to it. So I'm going to go into this container and I'm going to go ahead and add, let's say, some text to that. And we'll just go ahead and add some text. Line 1, line 2, and then line 3. So I think you're limited on panels, but containers have a little bit more power. So I'm going to add a button here, and I'm going to go container animate. Okay. So now I'm going to go to the click event for this button here, add a new action, and I've got an action in here that says toggle display of a container or div with animation. Now notice in here what we're going to do is we're going to select that container. So we're going to say toggle the visibility of container number 1. That's the thing I just did here. And now you see we have a whole bunch of different animations. So I can click on here and I can have pulsate, scale, puff, explode, drop, a whole bunch. I don't know if you can do there, but let's try pulsate, and you'll notice it kind of has that piece there. So now what I can do is when I go into my live preview, I can do this container, and you'll notice that it does kind of a cool animated kind of action on what's going on there.
That is cool. I didn't know it could do that.
Yeah, so now that works on a container. So if you have a container of items there, now what you can do is if you wanted to kind of mimic this, I could go to my container. I'm going to put it in panel card number 2, and I'm going to go to this container animate, and I'm going to do this. I've got my animation, but what I'm going to do is here is I'm going to add a new action. So I'm going to go to panel card, set active panel to be panel card number 2. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and animate that. So I'm going to mimic that. So I go to that panel and then I mimic it. So now let's see what happens. And again, this may not be exactly what you're looking for, but when I click container animate, that didn't work exactly right. It didn't work correct. So, but you would use a combination of oh, there it is. I hit the wrong one. So notice what I did here. I said I had added that command on the container animate. So I click here. It goes to panel number 2 and adds that animated effect. So that's maybe one way you can achieve kind of having a fancier, when you go to a different panel card, create it. I think panel cards are pretty much limited to either popping into place or sliding into place like you see here. Notice how it kind of slid into place. That's, I think, your limitation on panel cards at this time. But within containers, you have a lot more flexibility on what you could do with the contents and how to animate the contents being shown.
Great. We have sort of a nuts and bolts question here, and that is, okay, I've created an app on my machine, a mobile app, but now I want to send a demo over to my client so they can take a look at it. How do you go about doing that? What's sort of what's involved?
So you've created a mobile app. Is it a phone app, or is it like a mobile web browser?
They did not say, but let's go with
well, let me explain both ways.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
So let's say this one I'm going to deploy as what we call a mobile browser, meaning that it's not going to be wrapped into an app. It's actually going to be in a mobile browser. So what you will do is you'll develop your application like this, and then in order for them to access this, they need access to the app running on an app server. So you would either have that in your office location with a port that's open to the outside world, and you use the publish capability to publish to that app server. So if I go back into let me go ahead and show you what this looks like here, is that this is kind of an example, is that your development machine's down here, and then if you want your clients to actually use the app, we have our application server. So what you'll do is you'll publish the content of that app on your application server, and then just give a URL to your clients, and they will be able to use the internet to connect to that application server. So for instance, if you're hosting it within your office, you would expose your ports on your server to the outside world and connect them there. If you're using a third-party hosting company such as ZebraHost, this will actually be up on the hosting company, and you'll publish the files up to that hosting environment, and then again give your client a URL to that application on that application server. So that's how you would deploy if you're going to be using like a mobile web browser, where the nice thing about that is they don't have to install anything. They literally go to that URL and boom, the application is up and running. And your deployment time is instantaneous. If you need to make a change, you publish it to the app server, and the next time they hit that app server, it's going to load up the new code, and they'll be able to see what they want to do there. Now, if you're going to give them an application, then the method you need to do is you go to the Web Projects Control Panel, you've developed your UX, you go up here to the PhoneGap button, you insert your PhoneGap username and password, and then you tell it which UX component. So let's say, for instance, I wanted them to see my new dynamic parent panel. And then I click Save and Upload to PhoneGap Build. That sends it to PhoneGap Build. PhoneGap Build turns it into an app, and then they give you a QR code, which you can then forward to your client. You can forward to your client, and then using that QR code, they can download the app onto their machine. And there's a little difference between how you do it with Android versus iOS. Android's a little more loosey-goosey, easier to do. iOS, you kind of have to go through some things to make sure the app is certified and that they can access it, so a little bit more cumbersome. But the beauty of this is that you can either deploy it through the web browser, which is the fastest, easiest way because you just put it on the app server, give them a URL. But when you're ready to actually give them an app, you can actually use the PhoneGap build capability, and then once it's been uploaded and built, it will give you a QR code that you can send to them, and they zap that, and that basically is a download link to download the app onto their local machine.
Great, thank you. Couple more questions here. One is, and in fact that picture that you had a minute ago reminded me of this question. It has to do with, what if you wanted to do like a cron job sort of thing? Here's an example. Every Friday I want to send out a report to a group of people. So I've written the script that generates the report. I've written the script that emails the report. How do I tell Alpha 5 I want to trigger it Friday at 4 p.m. or something like that?
Great idea. Okay. So that would run on the application server, and the application server is a Windows Server 2008, 2012. So there's two different ways you can handle this. Method number one, and they both use the same concept. The same concept is you use the Windows Server Task Manager to actually run a recurring task that either calls a A5W web page to run that script if you're using just purely a web environment, or the other method you can do is actually use Alpha's included runtime, where you can actually generate a desktop app using Alpha that encapsulates those routines, and then you can actually run it as an app on the application server like any other Windows application. And again, you can use the Windows Task Manager.
Scheduler, I think.
Scheduler, yep, Task Scheduler to schedule that. So if you just want to stay pure web, what I've done is that I create an A5W page with a script on it that runs that process, and then I have a little script that's run by, it's just a task scheduler that calls that web page on an ongoing basis. Which works really nicely. It's very simple, and the Windows Server is going to consistently call that and run that process. If you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, then you can actually use Alpha. Since you can create desktop applications with Alpha, you can actually take those scripts, embed them into a desktop application, and then run that as an application on the Windows Server. And again, it can access all the database tables, etc., that you might want to do. So those are your two kind of like paths you can take to run those kind of recurring activities on the Alpha application server.
Do you have time to show the task scheduler, or is that more of an involved thing for another? Okay.
No, I can. Actually, I will. Let me do this. This is where we get really fancy. I'm you're watching my machine while I remote into my foreign server here. So I'm going up on my demonstration server here, and this is a Windows 2008. So again, you get access to this differently, but you can go into Start and then Scheduler, Task Scheduler. Okay, this will open up the Windows Task Scheduler. Excuse me. Okay. So now we have our Task Scheduler library, and you can create a basic task. Okay, I'm going to call this weekly process, blah, 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 blah. Next, we tell it when we want it to be done, let's say weekly. So, and there's other options that are available. Okay, how often is this going to occur? Every week on what date? So let's say it's that Friday you want to do that ongoing report. You can say when it starts there. You can also use universal time because sometimes your server is not in your local area there. Okay, now this is what I can do. I can say start a program, send an email, display a message. In this case, start a program. And then again, this is where I select my program. Now, if you are using, and by the way, there are alternative third-party task schedulers for Windows. This is the one that's built in, so it's free. It's part of the server. There's other programs like WinAutomation that are much more sophisticated, that can do more sophisticated things. So those are other alternatives for you beyond using the basic task capability inside of Windows Server. But what you need to do is that if you've built a desktop app, then you just point to the computer, go to Program Files, and then let's say I'm running, there's a exe file. So you point to your exe file, and then you can add your arguments in it that may be necessary for that. What I found is if you're going to run a web page, there's no way to do it within the task scheduler. So you can use these third-party tools, which are really powerful, or what you can do, which is very powerful, is you can write a little script using VBScript, and then have the task scheduler call that VBScript, which calls your web page. I know that's a little kind of sequencing, but the Windows basic capability or Windows scheduler really only knows how to call programs on the local machine there. So those are the two methods. And then once you've set this up, it's just going to run and automatically do that. And what I usually do for logging purposes is in my script, I write to the hard drive like when I did things, like little information. So you can just write save to file. You can just append to a file essentially the log activity of what you're doing. So if you ever have to go in and see what's going on, you can do that log activity. And I want to go ahead, and again, I'm not renumerated on this, but one I found is very powerful. There's a program out there called WinAutomation, and it's pretty inexpensive. Let's see, it's,
$150 or something.
Usually, yeah, $150. And considering how much time it will save you. But the cool thing about this is that you can record macros, but more importantly, you can create visual jobs. It's got the built-in scheduler. It's got a keyboard macro. You can look at the system information. It's got email automation in there. It's very robust, and it allows you to create these little routines that say, call this web page, grab the information from there, store the data here, then trigger this based on that information. So you actually almost have some intelligence built into it. So that's one that you may, and I know there's other versions of this kind of capability in there, but it's one I've used before, and I find it's pretty easy to use, so maybe something to look into. But if you want to just keep it simple, you can just use the built-in task scheduler, build a little app using Alpha, a desktop app, and trigger that just by saving that app and clicking it here.
Oh, actually, we have a very good piece of advice. At least it seems like here that someone's written in saying, okay, well, if you want to program
everything that.
No.
Ignore everything Dean said in the last 5 minutes.
No, not at all. You're here in the Create Basic Task Wizard, but you could actually call curl, which is a program, and then curl could open up could just basically call the page for you.
Yes, that is hugely powerful. And curl is, I think, is it built into Windows, or do you have to install
I
it?
think you get it separately, but it is free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've used VBScript because VBScript is built in and pretty reliable, and there's some example scripts on how to call web pages using VBScript. But you definitely have to call something from here to actually trigger that web page. There's no way in here to directly call the web page. If you're using something like web automation, you can actually call the web page directly in passive parameters and things like that, so it makes life a little simpler. But up to you, up to the individuals.
Here's a question. Someone said this, I now have a ZebraHost account, and I want to free up hard disk space. Do I really need to have MySQL or SQL loaded on my machine when it goes up to ZebraHost? Does that database have to be there?
So the database is currently on the development machine?
On the development machine, yep. Like, do they need to have that copy on the development machine?
Not necessarily, because what you can do is you can point to the ZebraHost server and access the database directly there. So you could do your development directly off your local machine. But again, the only downside is you have to have a network connection. So if you don't have a network connection, you're not going to be able to access your database. But if you did want to do that, you could eliminate the local databases and just use the databases on ZebraHost to connect to that. So that's definitely one methodology.
And that actually kind of reminds me of something we showed a few weeks ago, back when you were on vacation. Chris Martin was demonstrating an application that he built on one of the Wednesday sessions where he put a application on GoDaddy, but actually kept the SQL Server, put it on ZebraHost, but actually put SQL Server on his GoDaddy account, which is one of these sort of inexpensive hosting places for keeping data. It's an option. Obviously, it's not an option for everybody. It depends on security concerns and things like that. But you can certainly split them up. You don't have to have them on the same. You don't have to have them on the same machine.
Yeah, and I know multiple people who are using Azure, who are using AWS.
Azure, yeah, right. Those are perfect.
They're you know, and actually that gets really interesting too. Is that, and this is just kind of a side note, is that if I go back down here, most people have the application server and the database on the same machine. But that doesn't have to be that case. You can separate the application server and put your database on another machine. And what's really cool about that is that, there's some very inexpensive hosting solutions for MySQL and SQL Server, etc. But there's also some solution providers out there where, and AWS is one, Amazon, which create redundant MySQL systems. So let me actually show one just for everybody, just kind of prompt some thinking here. If you have a system where you want super high availability, you have different failure points. One failure point is the app server. One other failure point is your database. And so if you have everything on one, when that machine goes down, you're kind of not so good. But you can use these third-party services where, in this case, you can go to ClearDB, you actually host it on there, but they, behind the scenes, have distributed your database to multiple data centers all over the world. And therefore, and they have built into it, when you go call that database, if one of those databases is down, it automatically gives you to another one that's been mirrored and kept up. So you can get super high availability using these third-party systems. Now, there's more money involved with that, but if you're really concerned with this thing staying up, there's no reason why you couldn't, say, take your database and put it in a cloud environment that's distributed and backed up, and therefore you can get almost 99.999% uptime on your database, and thus you could have a couple different app servers calling that same database. So if you have to flip over from one app server to another, your database at least is always up and running. So just something to think about for people who are doing high availability systems that can't afford to have it down.
Excellent.
And again, this is just one example.
And one final question, and back to the add panel method create thing. Can you create a panel that has different input controls and buttons and stuff on it? You should.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Again, in our JavaScript code, and I'm going to show you an alternative way to do this next week, which will also help. And so that means come back next week. You got some great stuff there. In fact, I should not even answer that question right now and just make them go back. No. So what you can do is this content right here, you can control that content. So you can rechange this, have different controls available, different even embedded JavaScript to run, different look, feel, etc. So when you create this panel card using the new A5.panel card, you have complete control over the content there. The downside of this, you kind of have to handcraft that, but it's not too bad. There's some data on how to do that. Next week I'll show you a different way where you can kind of use the traditional the traditional alpha methodology to create your panels and put them, or your controls, and put them in there. So I think you'll find that very interesting.
That is great, and that takes us to 2 o'clock Eastern Time. I want to thank everyone who participated and asked questions, everyone who attended, and of course you, Dion, for doing another excellent presentation.
I really enjoy we enjoy the attention.
Excellent. So a copy of this recording will be posted in a couple of days. You can find it at videos.alphasoftware.com. If you do have any questions in the meantime about what you've seen or any other Alpha questions and you want us to take a look at them, send them to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks again for attending, and we hope to see you next week and at future webinars. Take care, and goodbye.